Please note that this episode was recorded before the COVID-19 pandemic. For information on how you can support this charity, please visit walkingwiththewounded.org.uk. My name is Michael Coates. I'm a former firefighter, but I'm also a former soldier. And it's the stories from the individuals within this military community that I'm desperate to document. Our next guest is a former Army officer with a family history of service. We talk about the military, life afterwards, and how a traumatic experience has changed his life and led him to find his purpose again. A Walking with the Wounded special, Ed Parker. This is Declassified.
Was you always destined to join the military?
Yeah, I think so. I was born into a military family. Dad was in the Navy. Both of my grandfathers fought in the First and Second World Wars. And my uncle was in the Army, my brother. So yeah, I grew up around it.
How old was you when you joined?
I was 18.
And then how old was your brother who joined?
So I'm a lot younger than I'm 11 years younger than him. So he joined the military when I was 7, and so I just saw him disappearing off. And he'd come home wearing his green jacket T-shirt. He was pleased as punch, and I'd look at it and go, yeah, I think I fancy some of that.
Yeah. Did you look up to him then? Because what was you, 7?
Yeah, he was much taller than me. Yeah, I did. I had 2 much older brothers. And so I got brought up pretty much as an only child. And they would appear from their adventures. My eldest brother by then was working in South Africa in the gold mines. And Nick, who joined the Green Jackets, was in the Army. And so he was out in Northern Ireland in the 70s when things were pretty lively. And so they were quite distant figures, but I used to think, wow.
Bring you gifts when they came back. And
no, I don't think they ever. Well, Nick and I share a birthday.
Right.
So, and I can't remember ever getting a birthday present. I think that's probably unfair.
Yeah.
But no, they brought nothing home.
And family life, was it pretty stable?
Yeah, it was very stable. It's, I hate this. I hate saying it like this, but we were sort of solid middle class, safe environment. I remember spending a lot of my time just being good. You had to be good, and I had my father was a firm but fair man, so you didn't mess around. You didn't want to screw up, but he was away a lot, because he was in the Navy, and when when I was young, they would go on 2-year deployments. I remember he was in the Pacific Fleet when I think we had a Pacific Fleet, and he was away for 2 years, and Mum went to visit him a couple of times, but for 2 years I didn't see him. My only contact was he used to send cine films back, which my mum would play. They had no noise. No voices, and so you just sort of see him flickering on the cine, and so he was away. He was away quite a lot, and he was he was quite a hard man.
So was the periods then with just you and your mum at home?
Yeah. For quite a lot of time. I was sent away to boarding school age 7. But mum and I were at home with my 2 brothers off earning their living elsewhere, and dad driving ships.
Yeah. So was it when you joined then at 18? Had you been boarding up until that point?
Yeah, I was sent away at 7. Sent away sounds awful, doesn't it? But I think there was a bit of me that wanted to go because I was at home on my own with most of the time with mum, and I think I was looking forward to seeing more people. I'm not sure. 7-year-old boarding's quite a tough gig, and I do remember there was a degree of homesickness, but. I think I came from an institutional background. My family was pretty institutional. So being sent into the institution of boarding school was okay.
And so I'm assuming then you was flying at school and you was going to be a doctor.
I love the way you think I was flying at school. I think actually I peaked. My school career did peak at sort of prep school, at the sort of primary school, and I was head boy. And I think there must have been another Parker in the school, because I think they might have picked the wrong Parker. But I wasn't prep school when I was younger. I was okay. When I went on to sort of the secondary stage, where I went on to a place called Winchester, I didn't do at all well. I was not engaged. I wasn't academic, or I wasn't academically motivated, and I jacked, and they weren't that interested in me. And I remember, that my parents would get school reports, and I used to dread. I used to be. My father would say at the end of the holidays, come and sit down and we'll go through your report. And I knew it was shite, and I'd go. My heart would sink, and it was it was not good. But no one ever did anything about it. The school didn't do anything about it. I think my father said, work hard, and I'd sort of go, yes. So I left. When I left school, I'd tell people I've got A levels. I have, but they're only just. And there were bits I enjoyed of school, but there were bits that I hadn't found what interested me. Maths, economics, and history, really? None of those really floated my boat, but that's what I did for my A level.
Physically, was you doing well?
Yeah, I rowed at school. I was in the 8, and we had a sport called Winchester football, which was sort of like rugby, with an element of wrestling in it, and it was good fun. We sadly didn't play rugby at school. I picked up rugby when I got into the army, but I was physical.
Yeah.
I did a bit of boxing as well. I really enjoyed boxing.
Did you thrive then during Sandhurst? Joined at 18?
Well, I went in the slow way, because I did something called Row Allen Company.
Yeah.
Which was they sent you there if they weren't quite sure about your RCB, the sort of the officers selection board, and if they thought you were a bit, I don't know what they thought about me, but I was probably a bit cocky. The military had been around me all my life. It was now my time, and I think I rocked up, and they went, "It's not quite your time yet, son." And so I went into Royal and Company, and that was just that's probably physically the hardest thing I've ever done. 12 weeks of just utter physical and mental punishment, but it was phenomenal. And I think the mates, 77 of us started, 23 finished. And the friends I made on that are still just amongst my best mates.
Then do you then start day one, week one, normal Sandhurst training then after that?
Yeah, you get a couple of weeks off, and then you go up the hill.
So you're fit as anything?
Fit as a butcher's dog. The one at Royal and Company, you do nothing military, really. No tactics, no weapon drills, anything like that. So, but you are fit. You're as fit as I've probably ever been. And so the first, I remember people saying, "Oh, the first 5 weeks at Sandhurst are hard." And at the end of the first 5 weeks, I was thinking, really? But because we'd done 12 weeks. But then you settle in, and everyone sort of gets to the same level. And I loved Sandhurst.
Where did you go after Sandhurst?
Well, I joined the Green Jackets, which was a regiment that my uncle had been in the Rifle Brigade. My brother was already a Green Jacket, and I went off to the 1st Battalion down in Tidworth, and wasn't there very long. I arrived, and they were doing what was it? Night-at training. We would get the battalion was about to go on spearhead. So one of the spearhead is just when there's a battalion that's ready to go anywhere in the world at the time, and the one RGJ was just training up for that. So we went on that training, and spearhead training was pretty much you were going to go to Ireland if you were deployed. And then we headed out to Kenya to do the live firing over there. I went just before Christmas with a couple of the other platoon commanders, and we had quite a good holiday before the battalion arrived. Then we did all the live firing, which was, you just turned up. I was 19 then. You're in the middle of Kenya with your platoon, with no left and right of arc. And I just thought, this is good. How can anyone else not want to do this? It was just the bee's knees. And then on the last day of our exercise, the commanding officer stood up and said, "Okay, you've got 5 days down in the coast, behave, get home, see your families, come back. We're off to Northern Ireland." And we had been, in our role as a spearhead, we were told get out to Northern Ireland because it was a bit busy.
19, and you're in charge of how many men?
A platoon, 28 of us.
Yeah. Do you look back and think it was a different?
I looked when my own son was 19. I looked at him, and he's a very good lad. He joins relatively soon. I looked at him, and he's an intelligent young man, and I thought I was commanding a rifle platoon. Mm. And you're trained to do it at Sandhurst. You know, leadership is something that they do. They give you the tools you need, but I think leadership is something that is the nature and nurture piece. I think there's a bit of nature in leadership, and you don't have to be middle class to do it. You know, that comes in all shapes and sizes. But we were conditioned at Sandhurst in it, and then you rock up, and you know, I remember I turned up at the battalion. My platoon sergeant, a guy called Paul Redding, and put the platoon out on first parade. And I'd actually done an O-type with the regiment, which is just for potential officers. You go and do a 5-week course. We did it at Peninsula Barracks in Winchester. So I went along with 3 or 4 other potential officers and joined the basic training cadre of riflemen going in. So I'd just been thrown in the deep end with guys from, you know, wherever in the country who were training to be riflemen. And I rocked up, and there in my platoon were 3 of the lads that I'd done my basic training with 18 months before. And my platoon's Paul Redding had said to me, "Look, boss," he didn't call me boss at that stage, he didn't know me well enough. He said, "So when you go out there are a couple of the boys, you know, you don't grin at them." And I walked out, and I was like the Cheshire cat. And they were all grinning back, and it was just, but it was there, I'm 19, I was one of the youngest, and I had the responsibility of these young men.
Is it the colour sergeant then that looks after you?
No, my platoon sergeant, Paul Redding, was he was my knowledge, along with my three section commanders, corporals. And I knew that I should only open my mouth once I'd consulted with them and drawn on their experience and ideas. And then you can form your own thoughts and say what you want to, deliver orders, give your own thoughts.
Was you prepared then for 86 going out to Northern Ireland?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Was I prepared? I was prepared in a military sense. You know, we'd done the training at Lyddon Hythe. We'd been up to, I think we did our training in Thetford. Was I prepared as a young man? No, I don't think I probably was. But what I knew is that I wasn't the finished article, and and that had been instilled into me, and I knew that I was going to rely on my senior and junior non-commissioned officers. By then, Paul Redding had gone, and I had this just cracking guy, John Binns, who was my platoon sergeant, who. And I don't know how many times John had been to Northern Ireland, but his brother was in the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, now the PSNI. And he knew the place like the back of his hand. He knew how the provost behaved. And so having him there, it was like I had my own personal Wikipedia. And so I spent a lot of time talking to John about what we'd just done and what we were about to do. So by the end of that tour, I sort of had a degree of competence, I'd like to think.
What was you doing?
We were reinforced. Northern Ireland was a really interesting one because, and I know you on this podcast, you've talked a lot about Afghanistan and Iraq. Op Banner, which is our deployment into Northern Ireland. The role of the army was to reinforce the police. That was the sort of overall strategic mission. We were there to reinforce the police, to allow the police to keep order. And we were not governed by martial law. We were governed by civil law. So you are hugely restricted as a soldier to what you can do. And we had this little thing called the yellow card, the green card. It was a card with colour, which had just like any conflict. But your ability to use your weapon was incredibly restricted. It was pretty much self-defense. And if you were, if you were being engaged. And so the role was a pretty complicated one. And there was a very, very fine line you had to walk between what was and what was not acceptable over there. And so it was it was challenging. It wasn't hugely kinetic, but it was psychologically it was hard graft.
What checkpoints in Sangers? What was you?
Well, yeah.
What was the day-to-day like?
Well,
like on the lads?
The day-to-day was that tour in '86. We were reinforcing existing battalions out there. It was busy. There were a lot of police stations being taken out by the provisional IRA. So we were going over to help reinforce the police stations. And so my battalion was split up into many different pieces. And I spent some time, we were based at the Maze reinforcing West Belfast. We spent some time dug in on Drummercaval above Crossmaglen, putting up the Gulf Taz. And we were protecting the engineers who were in the Gulf Taz. They covered them in a Wrigley tin. So the engineers could be inside building these things without anyone being able to see what was going on. And the sport became, on a couple of occasions, by the bad guys, they'd just fire at the Wrigley tin. You would hear, oh! as the engineers just dropped off the scaffold inside. And luckily, the only reason I laugh is no one was hurt, but the riflemen used to think it was the funniest thing ever because there are these engineers just sort of dropping on the inside. So we were dug in on Drummercaval, then we went down to Middletown, against South Armagh. And what we were doing, the game in Northern Ireland, and I reflect back on it, is you had to sow doubt into the enemy's mind, into the terrorist's mind. And listening to all the guys I've spoken to over the years about Afghanistan and Iraq, they were fighting an enemy where the value of life pretty low. In Ulster, we were fighting a criminal who had a much higher value of life. So they'd only ever pull a trick if they were 90-something% sure they were going to get away with it. So really what you had to do is sow a tiny seed of doubt into their mind that they might not get away with it. And so you just had to be thinking ahead. When you had a patrol, we patrolled in multiples of 4, and you probably have 3 or 6 bricks, groups of 4 out. And so you just ping them around so that if there were bad guys around, they'd go, well, where is everyone? And if they didn't know where everyone was, they would just quietly go back amongst their business and disappear. So it was a game of cat and mouse when the cat didn't necessarily know where the mouse was. And it was about, it was the old adage of dominating ground. We were just trying to dominate ground.
Was the second tour in '87, was that different, or was it more of the same? More of the same.
And I think in that period of the sort of mid to late '80s in Ulster, when you look at the number of incidents that there were in a tour, it was relatively low. And I think at that stage we were getting a little bit more sophisticated in how we were able to sow the seeds of doubt into the terrorist's mind. The tours were short; they were only 4 months. But one thing I do remember is R&R. You fly in and out of Aldergrove into Bryce, 45-minute flight, and you could be on the ground in the morning, and you could be sitting at your parents' kitchen table in the afternoon. And that, I do remember, there was one time it was just, and R&R was 4 days. So really? What good would, you don't even wind down in 4 days. And I remember that the transition from being in green with a rifle, with a live magazine, with your boys around you, and the intensity of making sure that you were doing your job. 45 minutes later, off the plane, you're sitting at home with your mum having a cup of tea. And that I do remember, that was difficult.
Yeah, it's a strange one, and I mean it happens probably still to this day to some respect. The kind of mental toll of it all, like the stress. You're in a situation, especially with yourself, where you're kind of looking after and guiding men around. Did it have have its toll mentally? Was there a stress on the guys?
Yes, there was. But do you know what? We didn't understand it. Mental health, and I know you're doing some really interesting stuff around mental health. So am I at the moment. Mental health. You talk about mental health in those days, and that was back to the grow some, wear a man suit, all those terrible cliches that we used to do. And if I remember that one rifleman was very, very scared. And fear is a totally natural emotion. I remember being scared on occasions, but this guy was finding it tough. But it ended up he got alienated, and it should never have happened. And the responsibility lies with me and my other commanders, because the other rifleman just gave him a hard time. And actually, what he needed was a little bit of love to help him. And so I don't think we understood the stress or the anxiety or that you can get from the intensity of the work that we were doing. It was way before the days that there was a CPM in the FOB that with you.
What's a CPM?
Clinical practitioner nurse. And nowadays, nowadays, certainly in those later years in Afghanistan, there were clinicians in at company level, so that soldiers who were beginning to suffer with their mental health, which we all do, there was someone there for them to actually talk
but
to.
not in the 80s.
No.
What happened? One of the lads killed himself.
Yeah, it was. One of the guys took his life, and it was. Funny enough, I was at the time, and I remember it terribly well. At the time, the world just kept turning, and people around us just said, "Get back on the horse," and we didn't sit down and address it. And for me to tell you the whys, I don't know the whys. He took his life, but he shot himself with his own weapon, and it was something that I don't think we addressed
As a group.
And I have over the years talked to one or two of those my guys who were in my platoon, many of who I'm still in touch with, and I think at the time we were completely just numb, and we didn't. I remember going to his funeral, and I remember his mum. It was terrible, and none of us really knew what to say, and we should have known what to say. And I feel we let him down. I feel that there was clearly a trajectory of where he was going, and I don't think we were informed enough or aware enough how to deal with it.
You're still young yourself though as well.
Yeah, I was 20, 19. No, I was 20, and it's pretty raw stuff. I think when you do join the military, you know that there's the potential for some relatively intense stuff to take place, and I remember I wanted to go to Northern Ireland. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to. I think initially I wanted, so you want to fight in inverted commas. Then you want to check that you're going to be okay. There's that little bit of, oh Christ, am I going to be all right when it goes Pete Tong? And then you get that bit when you realise, yeah, I am going to be all right. And then you get this challenge of operating alongside a group of, to me, the most special group of people I've ever been near. And it's an extraordinary feeling to be in the circumstances you get in, but the context of it, when I look back on it now, is quite it's difficult. And what happened to this chap, Geordie, was it avoidable? I don't know. I don't think you should ever pin that on any of us now. But I've gone through it on a number of occasions of what was happening around the time that he took his own life, and I just there's a bit of me that feels that probably we should have been able to help.
Why did you get out of the army?
I think I got out of the army because I was bolshy. Things were going relatively well. I'd been
This is 92.
Yeah, I'd had a couple of quite good jobs. They'd sent me off to be an instructor on the platoon commander's battle course. I probably thought a bit too much of myself. And then it was time to go back to the regiment, and I got told, you're coming back as a company second in command. And I remember thinking, I'm bloody not. And I sort of tried to go. I think I played poker and I lost because it was a big regiment, and it was a very, very good regiment with some extremely capable people in, and they basically said, well, it's that or the highway.
What was wrong with that? Coming back as the 2IC?
I thought I was ready for other things. And
You're a captain.
Yeah, and I think I should have taken a little bit of. I think I needed a bit of humility to go. Okay, I'll go back do this job, which would have been an interesting job probably. There's a bit of me didn't want to go back to Germany.
Yeah.
So I left, and I think what I think I wanted is when I said, well, I'm off, they went, okay. And I think what I wanted was someone to say, look, Ed, stop being a plonker.
Yeah. You're brilliant, stay.
Well, they didn't need to say I was brilliant, but just say, look, come on, stay. And I think there was a big migration of people my age, young, middle-ranking captains were leaving in droves. And I don't think we were being engaged as well as we could have been. But can you regret things in life? I don't know. I think you have to be careful about regretting things.
Was your brother in the same battalion?
He was in the same battalion when I joined. He was the ops officer of the 1st Battalion when I joined, and he then left pretty promptly. He was always, I think he'd been brought up in 3rd Battalion, and so he'd gone. I think by then, what was he doing when I left? Can't remember what he was doing when I left, but he'd gone. So I only served in the same battalion with him for about 3 or 4 months.
Oh, right, okay.
But I was always Nick Parker's brother, and Nick was a very, very capable soldier.
Was you close?
Yeah, we are.
Was you back then?
Well, it was what was really interesting when I turned up in the battalion, aged 19, having finished Sandhurst, and Nick and his wife Becky lived on the patch. And it was probably then that I got to know him, because as a kid, as I said, he'd been off and away, and they were great. They would have me around to dinner, and my 2 nephews were living there, and so I saw quite a lot of them. And I think there was the common experience. We were both green jackets.
Yeah.
And so I think we understood each other's background. We knew what made the other tick. And so there was a level of understanding. And so I think it did make us quite close.
So you bonded there, and with the kids and with his wife.
Yeah.
You got
absolutely
close there.
And because my two nephews were, when I was there, they would have been sort of, when I joined the regiment, 6 and 4, 7 and 5. They were small.
Great age.
Yeah.
So you left in 92.
Yeah.
And so you went from one interesting job that you could have had to a really interesting job in the financial sector.
I left the army, so the only thing I'm not going to do is go into the financial sector. So what did I do?
Yeah.
It was the only job anyone offered me, to be honest. I ended up. It was the old boys network. It was there was a green jacket general whose brother was a partner of a stockbroking firm. Slightly makes my toes curl thinking about it now, but they offered me a job. I took quite a significant pay cut, and off I went. And it was, do you know what was interesting? And I again, this slightly makes my toes curl. I'd grown up. I'd gone to an all-boy prep school. I'd gone to an all-boy public school. When I was in the military, there were not many women in the military when I served. And so all my life I'd been pretty much around men in the sort of academic work environment. And I went into this firm, which is normal place, and it was the first time I'd come across women in the workplace. And it was it was an extraordinary experience. You suddenly realize this is a slightly bigger world than the one that I thought. And it was then that I realized that, when you're in the military, you're quite protected from the realities of life. You're told what time you're going to the dentist. You're told you're clothed, you're fed. And I remember leaving was quite a shock. And I had a job, but I found that transition difficult, and suddenly this big wide world, there were really capable people all around me, men and women, and I remember this awful saying that we were the bastard civvies. And do you know what? In the minute that was a naive thing to say, and I now look back on that, and do you know what? Civilians. There's some very, very, very capable people in the military, and there's some very, very, very capable people in outside the military. And I felt that we'd been better, and it was.
That's a form of tribalism as well, and
yeah, it is.
It goes into troop, into battalion, into cap badge, everything. There's this tribalism in there. Well, when you got out, you spent 11 years in the financial sector. Was there meaning and purpose of what you was doing, or was it just cash?
No, there was no meaning. There was no purpose. It was cash, and I didn't. It was a job. I got married quite young, and had kids quite young, and had a mortgage, and so you got to pay this thing. And there's some people I work with who I really enjoyed working with, but it was a moral vacuum in the city. I felt I never felt that there was. You just said, was there purpose? No. And I remember dealing with people, clients, people the other end of the phone, who were running hundreds of millions of pounds of money, and it wasn't their money. It was your or my money in our pensions, or someone who lives in Solihull's pension, and these guys behaved as though it was their own, and were cavalier with it, and would then treat us as the sort of broker, like we were beholden to them. And I think it was in those days, I think it was a flawed environment. Today, the regulation and the compliance that's come in is they all say it's very it's restrictive, but in those days it was. I struggled with it, and I left probably before I should have done. When you look at it from the perspective of, was it a wise thing to do financially? Well, no, it wasn't. I hadn't made enough money to put my feet up. But I
leave the financial sector.
Yeah. But I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah,
we're not here that long.
But you left in 2003, and you set up a wine business.
Yeah.
So was the purpose and meaning in that?
Well, I knew there was. Well, I thought there were two types of wine, red and white. I then discovered there was a thing called rosé. I didn't know much about it. I've gone through this bit time and time again. What was I doing? I was trying to be an entrepreneur. I thought I wanted to run my own thing.
Was you in London?
No, we'd moved up to Norfolk. Left the city, moved to Norfolk. No job, no house.
Yeah.
Really responsible.
Yeah.
And this wine business just evolved because I thought I saw a niche, which was flogging wine to people like me. And it was it actually started off with, it went quite well. We ended up with an office in Norfolk, one in Newmarket, one in London. I brought in a few people who knew the difference between red and white wine, and it sort of ticked along, and I enjoyed running my own thing. I enjoyed being the boss again, and I'd lost that in the city. But it was proper hard graft. Really difficult to make money.
Really? Was you selling to consumer? Was he selling to?
Yeah, we were shipping it in from Europe. So we did all the shipping and the bonding stuff, and then we'd flog it principally to private individuals, a little bit to restaurants and hotels, but and we were flogging to the people in the city. We were flogging people in the racing trade in Newmarket. So it was quite a sort of high, trying to keep it high end. And then in 2008, when when Lehman's went down the spout, and the beginning of the financial crisis, we just saw our market disappear. That was our market, and the euro got euro strengthened, sterling went weak, and our margins. And it was just from then on in, it was a far fight.
Well, was there a problem with alcohol, or were people consuming a lot of alcohol in the city?
It's a very good question. I remember we had, and I say a couple of clients who you used to see how much booze they were buying, and you thought they were good clients, and then after a while you went, oh, hold on, this is not healthy. And there were some people they're either having parties for 24 every night, or they were drinking a huge amount. And it's interesting because alcohol is a very important part of what I do now. And I remember, take it back to when I was serving, alcohol was a crutch then. And, a lot of people were using booze as just sort yourself out. Here's a 4-pack, go away and drink it. And when I ran the wine business, you saw some people drink a hell of a lot. And is there a moral bit from then? You go, no, I'm afraid you can't buy it off me. Well, again, buy it somewhere else. But I think there's a very interesting question about in society.
I mean, I wasn't trying to lead you down a rabbit hole or anything like that. There, I was genuinely interested in if you looked at it, one, from being in and then selling to consumers, where if you felt like that, and of course, alcohol is widely available, and it does ease temporarily, the stresses and strains of life. 2009, a big stress and strain came into all of your lives as a family when your nephew was blown up. In Afghan.
Yeah, and actually that was a very defining moment for lots of people, and for Nick and Becky and their family, Harry, for heaven's sake. So
this is one of the nephews that was in Germany.
That's right,
running around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Harry had joined the Green Jackets. He was one of the last entries into the Green Jackets, and I suppose so that must have been 2007, as it was becoming the Rifles. And he'd done that quite lively tour in Basra Palace towards. So that must have been in 7 or 8. I can't quite remember which year. And then had deployed with 4 rifles out to Afghan in 2009, and he was injured just about at the beginning of Panther's Claw.
What was the impact on the family like?
It's really interesting. I think for Nick and Becky, Harry's parents, they looked in on Harry. That's what they were now focused on.
And your brother was still in?
My brother was still in. He was about to go to Afghanistan.
What was he? What rank was he at?
He would have been a 3-star then.
So he was a 3-star general.
Yeah.
His role was?
He was about to. I can't remember what he did. I can't remember what he was doing when Harry was injured. But he was about to go out to Afghanistan as the deputy commander. He was going out as Stan McChrystal's number 2, which was that deputy role was a British role. So he was. I think he was meant to be going out in September. Harry was injured in July.
So they were looking in on him.
Yeah, so they looked in, and their priority was Harry. Getting well initially. He was ill. He was very ill. Sounds the wrong word. He was very badly injured, but remarkable medical care. And their focus was on Harry and supporting Harry. The rest of the family we were just told what was going on. And you had to react to it, as as supportive of way as you can. And it was interesting that how different members of the family reacted. We were all the only thing we cared about was Harry. But watching, some people understood it, others didn't quite understand it. I remember my old man. I think he found it pretty difficult. but it was
What, in a hopeless kind of way? As in, he was helpless, sorry.
I wonder if that might have. He wasn't in control of it at all. He just had to sit and watch it going on. And there's one of his grandsons who's been and at one stage was right on the edge of life. And so I think Dad probably. I think you're right. He was helpless. He couldn't do anything. Whereas my mum was a stalwart. She sort of got on with it. But it was. It's funny. It's 11 years ago now, and it's. I can't tell you where the last 11 years have gone, but it was a very. Things slowed down when it happened.
Time.
Yeah, and it was, and there were a lot of young men and women coming back at that time who had been injured, and suddenly it was your own family, and that's, how many times have you heard it won't happen to me? I can't remember how many times in life I've thought to myself, it won't happen to me, and there it was. It had happened to Harry.
Was you speaking to your brother?
Yeah, he was. He was remarkable. He's got the sort of he's one of these people who seems to be able to think clearly through whatever is happening. He has this sort of clarity of thought. I suppose that's what you need when you're going to be a general. But he was very articulate, very clear of what was going on. I'm sure he inside had his own thoughts, but he approached it with this remarkable calmness and remarkable ability just to say, this is what's going on. It was sort of fact. This is the fact of what's going on. So he was, I wasn't the point of contact, but he was telling me quite a lot, which I could then sort of pass on to other members of the family. And I, just to start with, they wanted us just keep away. And then slowly, we were sort of said, Harry would love to see you. He was, Harry was ill for quite a while.
And how did his injuries change the way you looked at life and employment? Not employment, your employment. So, how did it change the way you perceive things?
That's interesting. I think historically, I remember being slightly embarrassed by people's injuries. If you met someone who had a physical injury, it was always difficult to sort of go, you'd sort of ignore it, you'd skirt around it. With seeing where Harry was, and he was in a bay with there were 6 or 8 of them in that bay at Celio who had all been pretty badly beaten up. You couldn't avoid it, and you'd actually suddenly go, so what happened to you? And it wasn't as though there was relief for people when you said, but at least they could talk about it. And now one of the things I've had, if I see someone who's been injured, I find it terribly easy to go, so what happened to you? And you immediately get an understanding of who they are. Whereas, and I remember Harry telling me that he lost both of his legs. I remember Harry telling me that some people would actually look at him in a way that, so they couldn't actually see the fact he had no legs. And I think that's, in a way, that's very harsh on these guys who've been injured. But it's very sad that you don't have the confidence to be able to say, wow, what's happened to you?
Afghan changed, especially Afghan, changed perception of people, especially guys who had amputations.
Yeah.
Changed socially, on a social level, and now you see people who are proud, and actually operationally it's much easier to wear shorts and to do all that kind of stuff. But it did change a lot of perception. But I want to bring you back to that question. How did you perceive that, and how did you move forward with that?
I went up to see him in Celio quite relatively soon after he was injured. And I remember I was reading, there was lots going on in the Daily Mail and the Sun, and there were new charities that were springing up. And I remember reading this sort of narrative of pity and sorrow about these young men and young women. And I think I probably bought into it. I don't know why. And I went into Celio, and I remember as I walked in, there was a rifles platoon commander who'd lost a leg and lost an arm on the same side, and he was just getting out of bed. His family were with him, and he was standing up for the first time, and the utter joy on his face. And I can see it's absolutely a picture I can see in my mind's eye. And what I heard and what I saw was people going, right, what next? What am I going to do? I'm going to jump higher, run faster, go further. And that there was a completely different story. And these were people going, and I know it's not as simple as this, but these were people saying, I'm still here, so I'm going to still achieve. And to me, there was a disconnect in the reality to the storytelling that was going on to the wider community. And sure, a lot of that was going on in order to raise money, raise awareness, do good stuff. But I just felt for these people who I'd seen, we were doing them a disservice. They didn't want to be pitied. It's patronizing. And so it had this, you said what effect did it have on me? I was at the time, I've had quite an extended midlife crisis, and it was probably near the beginning of it. I was planning with a couple of mates to ski to the North Pole. And I've always liked to venture. I'm quite sort of physical, and I have to drag my old bones somewhere to just keep. I like a challenge. And I was sitting having a drink with one of the guys, Simon Daglish, an old mate of mine. He and I had been at Sandhurst together, and was telling him about Harry and what had happened and what I'd seen up at Selly Oak. And he said, "Well, why don't we take some wounded guys with us?" And there was absolutely no reason why to say, yeah, why not? And so we just started putting this plan together. We met a Norwegian polar guide who had worked with people with disability, and he went, yeah, it's possible. And we then went to the MOD saying, are you happy for us to do this? And yeah, after a little while, they needed a bit of convincing. These were their young men who'd been beaten up once. They weren't going to give them to a couple of middle-aged guys to take them away and be beaten up again. But we proved to them that we were credible. And so we started putting this plan together to ski to the North Pole. By a simple phone call, we got Prince Harry involved, which that just changed everything. And Walking with the Wounded was born out of that.
Who came up with the name?
My wife. I don't know what we were going to call it, but I don't know what the options were.
It's quite slim options, isn't it, when you start thinking about it?
Yeah. And then the man pulling the pulk was drawn by Harry, my nephew, because he's an artist. So it was, and that's great. I do see that, and you have to look hard, but he's got a prosthetic leg. The guy skiing, yeah, so. That's where it came from, and it was. I think we thought it was just going to be a one-off.
Was it a charity then? On that first one?
Yeah. So we set it up as a charity in 2010, and everyone don't need another military charity, which the element of truth. But
sometimes you actually do.
Yeah, and we'd been dogged by. We went to another charity, military charity, and said we want to do this. Can we use you as a conduit to do it? And they'd basically said no. And actually, they were right to say no. If someone came to Walking with the Wounded with the same proposition now, we wouldn't be able to do it. There's governance issues and what have you. So we set up the charity, raised sponsorship. It was hard work doing that.
Really quickly, just to had setting your own business up and going through that kind of graft in 2003 up to that present day, because you were kind of winding it down at this point. Had that given you a good kind of foundation into setting things up and being kind of meticulous and having that kind of mindset about it?
Yeah, people chuckle when they hear you talking about me being meticulous. But yeah, I'd learnt a lot. I'd learnt a lot from the wine business, which had been really tough. And so I think I'd taken lessons away from that, which helped me set up the charity.
And then go on. Sorry, I interrupted you there. But 2010 set up.
So we set the charity up at 10. We sort of sorted ourselves out. We skied to the North Pole. Getting there April 11 with 4 guys who'd been wounded.
Who was on that?
So Guy Disney, who'd lost his leg, Martin Hewitt, who had a paralysed right arm, Steve Young, Welsh Guardsman, who had a broken back, and Jacko Van Gass, who lost his left arm. And it was the first. It was the first of the big adventures that now Wounded had done some extraordinary things. But we were pretty much the first one out there. And
Because that was all documented on film.
yeah, the BBC did that one.
Yeah.
And it was Prince Harry was the guy who are we until Prince Harry comes along and people are interested.
Yeah.
And he helped so much in the visibility of what we were doing. And he'd recently come back from his first tour, and he'd been in the back of a C-130 with a couple of guys who had been in an induced coma and a couple of body bags. And I think that had a very profound effect on him. It would have a profound effect on anyone.
It does.
But he knew he could do something. He knew he could turn the spotlight on, and we've all seen what he's done since then. But it was, I remember him when I was introduced to him. I'd never met him before, and I was introduced to him, and I, telling him, "This is our plan, sir. This is what we're going to be doing." And I remember he looking at me, he said, Would you mind if I came along too? And I was like, nah, shove off. Don't want you there. I beg your pardon. And he said, do you mind if I come too? And I thought, wow. And he had to leave. When we went to the North Pole, he came to the South with us as well, but when he went to the North Pole, he had to leave early. He got flown out early because he had to come back for his brother's wedding. And I remember we were standing on the ice, a helicopter had flown in. We'd actually only been going 3 or 4 days. So if he's listening, you only did 3 or 4 days. We did the rest. But I remember him sort of giving me a hug, and I said, "Well, thank you for coming." He said, "Thank you for having me." And I just thought, you get it.
Yeah.
And he's been a huge supporter of what we do, a huge supporter of the veteran community.
Yeah, his influence is spread, and it will carry on. The stuff that he's helped set up, the stuff that he'll do in the future. So Everest was next.
Yeah, Everest was next. I didn't go on that one. We didn't get to the top, and I think it was. I know you've spoken to Wisey on this, and Jacko. It was the right decision. It was getting a bit lively up the top, and the risk return started going the wrong way. So we decided not to let them go have a crack at the top of Everest. They'd been up Manaslu, which was another one of the 8,000 meter peaks. And
it's still pretty hardcore doing that.
And what I really regret is we'd kept that off the radar because Everest was the goal.
Yeah.
And yet the first.
Well, Wisey was telling me about that the other week. He said it was severe.
And there was an avalanche.
Yeah.
While they were up there. I remember Wisey called me. I was in Bath, and I get this call on my mobile, and it was Wisey on the sat phone, and a little bit wobbly, going, Parks, we've just had an avalanche. And I'm going, what do you want me to do about it? Luckily, they were the guy.
He said he was totally calm and composed.
Did he? Yeah. Okay.
But that was such a big feat, and then the Everest, they did a big chunk.
Yeah, they did a big chunk, but it was a very dry year. There was a lot of loose snow and ice. Jacko and Francis Atkinson, by the skin of their teeth, avoided being hit by an avalanche. And it was just we didn't need to kill anyone.
No.
And I remember talking to the climbing leader, a guy called Russell Bryce, who's a legend of Everest. And I said to him, Russ, do they keep going up or do they come down? He said, they come down. I said, done. And the guys were disappointed. No surprise, but I think it was the right call.
Next year was South Pole. We're going to skim over it. And I'm bloody skim over the South Pole, but what I really want to focus on now is, when did it change from doing walks to something with a bit more meat behind it?
I think after the South Pole, by then we were beginning to raise a bit of money. We were giving the money away to other charities that, with an emphasis on employment. I always felt employment was absolutely crucial. So we were just writing checks. We were granting money to other military charities.
How were you raising money?
Just people. People
Public
were giving
donations.
it to us. And through the expeditions, you said click here, and we were beginning to raise a little bit of cash. We didn't have a fundraising team. We just were bimbling around pulling sledges, and people were giving us money. But we started looking to see how the organisations we were giving were spending the money, and we thought we could do better. And so we started building our own infrastructure to provide employment advice. And in doing that, we began to identify a cohort of veterans that actually weren't getting much support. And it's pretty good that the military network for support for veterans isn't bad. There's always, you can pick fault with it, but generally speaking, it's not bad. And we just found there was this group of individuals who had found the transition out of the military difficult. They were probably beginning to see a breakdown in their social structure. They're fucked up, basically. And becoming socially isolated on the edge of the criminal justice system, had been or were homeless. Very large issues around mental health.
Vulnerable.
Very. And people who didn't click on the red button which says contact us, these were guys that you had to reach out to them.
Yeah.
And so we started concentrating on this complex cohort. And you don't always succeed, and they ain't heroes in the eye of the public, but these are people who served. And in our we felt that they deserved help as much as anyone did. And when you look at it from a socio-economic point of view, these guys are a big drain on society. Make them right, and they contribute to society.
Well, because of prison, because of the NHS with regards to kind of mental health,
exactly,
substance abuse, all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and they're receiving benefits. They're presenting in A&E. They're presenting in police custody. They cost society. Their life's a bit shit, and these are guys who have value. If and when you turn them around, they start earning a salary. They've got a roof over their head. They pay tax. They get worth and value back, and
which then leads to building families back together and all that kind of good stuff that comes with it.
Yeah, and the family is a really crucial part of this, because what we're finding now, what we found and what we're finding more and more is that some of these, they're predominantly men, but they're quite a low proportion of women, predominantly men. You provide them the tools to move forward, and then there's a danger you drop them back into a dysfunctional family, and all your good work is undone. So you've got to address the needs of the family as well as the needs of the individual.
What is the good work?
For our point of view, it's providing them employment support. We have a mental health program. And then the sort of third thing we do is what I think the old-fashioned case working. We call it care coordination. And that basically is dealing with all their other complex needs. And we can't do that. Walking with the Wounded doesn't do that. So we're working with a plethora of partners to make sure that the individual, every element of need is addressed. Because you can't just say you've got a job chum if they've got debt up the Swanee, if they're alcohol dependent. You've got to sort out everything. And so we build a holistic pathway and manage it for them. But we're going to work with our principal partner is the NHS, and I'm a huge advocate of the NHS. But we have to build a care network for these individuals. And I think the average time that one of our, we call them clients, one of our beneficiaries is in our care is about 9 months.
And how many at one do you have in kind of the system?
Why do you come up with all these good questions? I think today we're probably dealing with between sort of 500 and 700 people today. Last year we provided direct care to just under 1,900 men and women.
I mean, from the employment side of things, really low figures when you look at, I think the employable age of the veteran community is about something like 1.6 million, where there's 2.5 million in the country that, in general, but of employment age, about 1.6, something like that, isn't it? And then when you've got 500 that are in kind of your support, it's a small cohort, but it's a cohort that needs to be looked after and supported and guided through this. And it can seem jaded, and especially when there's these other issues, and especially when you've got the NHS do an amazing job. Funds aren't quite there at the moment for mental health support, so to have someone like you there to help them, what are you seeing? Are you seeing great results?
Yeah, we are seeing good results. But one of the things we do recognise is we're not going to succeed 100% of the time. You can't.
No.
And what our biggest challenge at the moment is when we don't succeed, what do we do with the individual? Because we're already pretty much at the top of the pyramid. So what's above us in terms of the care? What care is available? And if you look in the NHS, the answer is not much. If you look into the military charity sector, the answer is not much. So what do we do with someone that we can no longer support? And it's going to be because they're too complex. And we don't have the answer to that at the moment. And so it's poor.
Do you keep them in your system?
Well, we have to be really careful, because do you keep pumping money that we've been generously given into someone that you are not going to succeed with, when you know you've got a waiting list of others where hopefully you are going to succeed with quite a high proportion? At what point do you cut that support? And it's a moral dilemma, but also it's a commercial dilemma, because we only receive X amount of pounds a year, and we've got to use that money as effectively and as efficiently as possible. That's why people give it to us. So then the NHS are doing some quite interesting stuff at the moment around a high intensity service, which is going to be a newly commissioned program that will be commissioned in May, June this year. That's going to probably give us somewhere to refer these people into. But it's a problem in society. It's not just for the veteran community. Very, very ill people. What do we do with them?
You finding, so there's several hundred people. Is there an age bracket? I don't want to know exactly what, but are you seeing guys from the last 20 years or 40 years or 10 years? What are we seeing?
We've got from a spread across all ages. Up at the older, sort of 65 and north, we don't see a huge amount. And that's where the likes of particularly the British Legion are very strong. But we
is that because of the employment piece, I suppose?
Probably,
yeah.
And also they've got their old people's homes and and actually it's not respite care, but those people they need looking after. The people we're working with, they're going to still contribute, and so we're polishing them up and getting them out there again. And one of the things that makes my skin crawl is when you hear some people say, "Come and join our family." Well, they've got a family. Let's give them the tools and their family the tools to exist in society and move on. Because one of the things that, you and I both served, and so we're veterans. I've been a civvy far longer than I was ever serving in the military. And while I do identify and am hugely proud of my short term as a soldier, I've done a hell of a lot longer as a civvy. And you've got to survive as a civvy. And that's what we're trying to... with the men and women who come into our programs, we're trying to give them the tools to go out there and be their own person in the civilian world and have worth, have purpose, and support their family.
What's the future of Walking with the Wounded? Well,
we've found, I think, a niche that's most people acknowledge we're good at, and so we've just got to keep growing. One of the difficulties at the moment that we've all got in the military charity sector, is the wars are beginning to drift quite a long way into the past. So the public's ability to engage with what we're doing is becoming harder and harder. And yet, as mental health is becoming so much more understood and accepted and talked about, the number of people that we need to help is growing. Now, you can say that's great, and it is, that there is this admission of what the problem is, but it's putting a hell of a lot of pressure on all of us at the moment, because funding's difficult.
But we're still looking at the employment side. You're still adamant that is the way to move forward. That is to if you're looking at kind of long-term recovery, employment is right up there.
There are no end of pieces of academic research that show that the two most significant things to your mental health, your family and your employment. It's not pills or therapy. It's those two things. And so if you give someone a job, you give them purpose. And so I really believe that employment, and it doesn't have to be full-time employment. The employment outcomes come in many shapes and sizes. It could be part-time, could be voluntary, you could be working from home. But it's such a key element of your mental well-being, your self, that I think it's crucial. And I think the days of the prevalence of pills, which in America, and I've spent quite a lot of time with the veteran and the injured community in America. They're rattling like pill bottles. They're giving them far too many pills, and that's just numbing them. And I think it's great in the UK that we're looking at the way that you can deal with someone's mental well-being in a far more holistic way, and employment, wellness, the MOD and the Royal Foundation have been real leaders on this. And as you and I were saying before we started, the military community is way ahead of society on mental well-being. We're leading it. It's remarkable. And I then go back to where I was in the 80s about, wear a man suit, which makes my skin crawl now. But we're the pioneers. Society should see and watch what the military community is doing.
There certainly is a spearhead, and I love seeing it. I love seeing my friends and organisations and people who I look to from afar doing some amazing stuff. How do we support charities, but how do we support specifically Walking with the Wounded now?
Awareness remains a really important bit. Support is always, cash. One of the things I find hardest about the charity world is asking for money. It still makes my skin crawl, but we still need money. We're different from some of the others. We're not a bucket rattler. We're trying to talk to institutional donors, and the NHS is a very generous supporter of what we do financially. But watch what we do. It's our 10th anniversary this year, so we're trying to make a bit of noise. We've got another walk coming up, which we'll be announcing on the 2nd of April, which will be sort of just to remind people we're here. And people can get involved in our events. Michael, it's the usual gear. Go to our website.
Yeah, which is?
Oh, why did you say? I guess it's Walking with the Wounded. I guess.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it.
But we'll stick it all out as well. I went to... I got invited by you guys to the 1917 premiere.
Oh, it's a great movie.
Yeah, it was great, and it was good to be around your team as well as the people that support. And I mean, you are doing some amazing stuff, and I'm firmly behind the employment piece. Thank you so much. And we'll leave it there.
Thank you.